Check,
Can you
check
hear me?
one, check.
I don't know if you can hear.
Check.
Can you hear me?
Check, check, check.
I don't.
Get real loud in
Check.
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 Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Laura.
John, we were going to do assessment after transition plan and public comment and then assessment, if that's okay with you.
Transition plan.
Then public comment.
Okay. And
Just 'cause
then
that's the heavy-
assessment is 3. Okay. And first up is curriculum, transition plan update.
Yes, thank you. We have a slide presentation on the big board.
Can I go sit over there?
Sure.
Just so I can see it better.
So did you. Over there.
So welcome. Rick joined us for a transition team meeting, which included the administrative council and the building leadership teams from each school building to a long meeting Thursday night. Is that right? Thursday night? Where we went over a number of different proposed models for return to in-person instruction in a hybrid format. And this was kind of just the big picture of what drove us. The goal was to get 146 students to return to in-person as soon as possible, no later than the first day of the second trimester, and to do so safely. These are some of our sub-goals: high-quality instructional practices, manageable service delivery model, continue to follow the guidelines, utilize available staff without additional FTE required, minimize teacher caseload changes to the greatest extent possible, so as many students would retain their current service providers and teachers as we can, and also minimize scheduling impacts for families. So the objectives of the night and the objectives of this exercise is to communicate the need to return students in person and familiarize you with the guidance. Of course, you probably don't need us to go over the guidance a good deal much more. Review recommended the model, which the team chose and why, and discuss the strengths and challenges of that model, and then develop a timeline for phasing it in. And we've got a timeline developed for your consideration tonight as well. So we're currently in full remote for the remainder of the first trimester. However, at our last committee of the whole meeting, I expressed an interest in returning sooner, and that was met favorably by the board. So our goal is to do it as soon as possible. We've already returned students with special education needs. That's been successful. We've received the tough-to-get PPE that we hadn't received before. Our positivity rates continue to be at or below 8%. Surrounding districts seem to be having some success with their hybrid programs. And everybody agrees that nothing can beat in person. So there's not a whole lot new with the guidance, but we're doing a number of things. Much of it in the guidance, some of it not, over and above. Daily self-certification, both of students who are coming into the building and all staff. That's something that we're very used to doing every morning. That's a pretty comprehensive checklist of COVID symptoms. And then we also are taking student temperatures as they enter the building. Face coverings, other PPE, we're practicing physical distancing. We've got some experience with that. It'll be different with lots of kids, obviously, but it's not like we'd be doing it for the first time. Frequent hand washing, sanitizing, regular cleaning and disinfecting. We've also got a contact tracing program that we've developed that we've been exercising, and it's been effective. Obviously monitoring illness. Our nurses have a good deal of practice with that. And then we've got a quarantining process that is IDPH compliant that we've been exercising as well with success. So this is just a list of the options. There was actually a fifth option that wasn't quite as well developed that we considered last Thursday. Option 1 is the one that we chose. That's the split AM/PM 5 days a week. Option 2 was an AB split week, full days, but not every day. Option 3 was split AB as well, except when you were not present, your remote instruction would be asynchronous. It's just a little bit different way to do option 2. And then option 4 was extended half day. That was all students every day for a shortened period of time. And that was actually one of the school buildings' first choice. The other 4 school buildings chose option 1 as their first choice. And the school building that chose option 4, that's Fulton, option 1 was their second choice. Now, Fulton just happens to have the smallest class sizes this year in the district. So they felt like they could do option 4 and have all students every day for a shortened period of time, considering that some students were going to be remote. But one of our tights was whatever plan we choose has to work regardless of how many parents choose hybrid and how many parents choose remote. And for option 4, most of the buildings would require a certain amount of students to choose remote in order for the students to fit in the classroom and still uphold the guidance. The other really, I guess, discredit to option 4 is the total school building population, which is another consideration that we need to keep down. The way kids move about the building, how they transition. So in order to be good at the guidance, we need our class sizes to be relatively small and our total building population on any given day to be relatively small. So option 4 didn't accomplish either one of those things at most campuses, and option 1 does. So when we went around the room to get consensus on the options, option 1 was the only one that got thumbs up from all 5 buildings. All the other ones were either thumbs sideways or thumbs down, with the exception of Fulton for option 4. So option 1 is 2.5 hours per day, every day, on site, 5 days a week for in-person. Half the students would come in the morning, the other half would attend in the afternoon. During the in-person time, the focus is on social emotional learning, language arts, math, and then some social studies and science. Remote instruction for specials would be predominantly synchronous, which we believe is an advantage. On the other half of the day, with extension activities, additional social studies and science in an asynchronous way to support what they got synchronous in person, and also extension of learning for students who already got it and intervention for students who didn't. Specials would be predominantly remote, and grade level content areas would deliver the in-person instruction daily with no lunch. So this note on the bottom is really important because some of these students in special education and in English language departments have been receiving some services already. So our intent is to provide as many of those services as we can during the half day that they're not in their gen ed in-person instruction. So there'd still be some for students who are assigned to PM. These students would still be getting some services in the morning, and for students who are AM in the afternoon. Kelly, you want to say more about that?
Yeah, just a little bit. I just wanted to, I want to be transparent in the fact that right now we're providing a lot of in-person services to students with special education needs. primarily because we felt that with us being 100% remote, there were many students, even though they spend the majority of their time in general education classes, we were very concerned that we weren't going to have any in-person contact with them. So we kind of invited as many as we could to come in for a portion of the day. When we move to this model, there is going to be a group of kids that won't need additional time in that half day because they're going to be here every day. We'll be able to provide their services through their gen ed classes like we would if we were normally in school. But there will also be students that we will offer an additional full day to, for example, or a couple extra additional half days. So those will be identified on an as-needed basis, and we will have those conversations with families. Our kids with the most significant needs, of course, will be the ones that we prioritize to be here more often and all day. But we do need to, I just want to be transparent that it isn't every special education student that would be offered additional time.
Yeah, there's a good number of students that typically would get their services in the gen ed environment if COVID didn't exist, that could return to that delivery model in this hybrid. So these are the strengths and challenges for option one. The good stuff is pretty obvious. We see them every day. There's no long period of time between touches, so to speak. Very small class sizes. The highest class size that would ever exist in this model is 50%. And that's if no students in that class chose full remote, which is unlikely. So it's going to be less than half of the students on a given day. He says teachers in general will be able to maintain the same class rosters. There's going to be some students that can't, because staffing this thing is a huge jigsaw puzzle. We've got a couple different ways to staff it, which you'll see later on. But of the options, this is the one that preserves current rosters the most. So we're trying to minimize disruption. Core teaching subjects, since we have just a short amount of time in person.
Can you tell me, what does that mean, prioritized areas from ISB?
Yeah, so ISB says that if you can't teach your kids everything, teach them math and ELA. And that's a really, I think, basic point of view. We've got a much more diverse expectation than this district for student experience. So the intention is to make sure that we're doing those two things well, but among the other things that we do, social emotional learning, for example, and certainly some social studies and science. So the problem is that 2.5 hours a day is just not very much time. So we talked a little bit about, is there a way to take students through their entire schedule, like not in a single day, of course, because they'd be seeing each thing for 12 minutes, but over the course of days, and it becomes a logistics impossibility because of all the different things that teachers do. So the 4 cores are what's taught by the homeroom teacher at the elementary level. So minimizing travel, making sure that the specials get touched by each kid in a regular way. It's just very challenging. And they're receiving all of their education synchronously remote now. So we've gotten pretty good at delivering those things remotely synchronous anyway. So there's so many different factors that can make the whole thing fall apart. Really, I wish you guys could be a fly on the wall for one of these ad council meetings, because the team has really, really high goals, and it's very challenging to frustrate them. But there's some things that will be through our 3rd and 4th and 5th good idea, and none of them work. So sometimes it's easier to just simplify. So that's not the best thing about it. Like I said, of the 5 models we considered, we were in love with none of them, each for different reasons. So the fact that we're able to get substantial in-person core time is a plus, But the fact that we can't get everything in-person core time, or instructional time is, I think, a weakness, so.
Jeff, can I just add something real fast?
Sure.
So I think the Air Council had a lot of discussion around too, that with the remote and our specials, we're finding it's almost richer being remote because of so many restrictions we have, like PE, for instance. They would have to come into the classroom and kids would have to be at their desk. And that movement is very limited, where when they're teaching remotely, the kids have this ability to really engage and be able to perform, different fun things in PE versus kind of that limited amount of that space that they're rigid into. And we're finding that a little bit with the art too. So we talked a lot about that too. And if we're gonna get them back here for 2.5 hours, as Jeff mentioned, that we are focusing on the core, but we're definitely focusing on a whole day of the whole child and looking at what was best to be in the remote area and what was best to be in the.
Right, I agree.
Does that make sense, Jeff?
Yeah, and if we didn't value all those things, we would
It's
just
not
stop
bad.
at a half day of core and
Not at all.
not offer the other things, but.
I agree with that, except that Central's all in health right now. But when they were doing PE, I could see on a personal that there was a lot more movement. And I also agree with everything you're saying, but just out of curiosity, I'm wondering, does ISB just say that, or how do they make sure that districts are prioritizing it? Like, how do they manage it? This is just,
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to give a copy of what we do to our
Okay.
ISC. I'm not sure that ISB is checking.
yeah,
Obviously, if we get chosen for a state audit, it would be found in that, but that's random. And there was one period where we were audited 1 year, the next year, a year off in the following year, and then there was another period where we went 4 years without an audit. So there's no really rhyme or reason to it. I think what ISB is trying to do is make sure that kids in districts that aren't planning as conscientiously as we are learn math and ELA. And I think that there's also some, I can't say this for sure, but my inkling is that there's some leftover remnants of No Child Left Behind, where somehow those two subjects are more important than all the others. And I don't personally agree with that, but I understand why they would take that stance. Like, if you're going to get nothing else, here's what you should get. But fortunately, we're not in that boat. We don't have to stop at that.
thank you.
You have more to add, Wendy?
Just that, each year, like at the beginning of this year, we had to submit a remote learning plan. And so our responsibility then is, if we're gonna make changes, is to update that. And so they do approve that at the ISC. So I'm not sure, like Jeff said, how much are they sitting there saying, oh my goodness, you don't have enough ELA or math, but they certainly are looking at those plans to ensure that math and ELA are in there for
Yeah,
sure.
when we tell Vanessa that we intend to do
50 minutes.
all of our normal course of studies, she'll say, of course you are. But that's not the case for all 80 whatever districts in South Cook. And it has the total building capacity of 50%, and really, frankly, unless no one chooses remote learning, it'll never be that high. My guess is it'll be somewhere in the low 40%. The challenges are the transportation costs for midday routes, because we're going to have kids coming in the morning, kids going home in the late morning, kids coming in the early afternoon and going home in the mid-afternoon. And Jeff estimated that cost to be around $300,000. He thought we could come under that. And with a really quick cabinet meeting, we found $140,000 of it from grant things that aren't going to be able to happen because we're remote, things like that. So we're going to be able to reallocate some funds that aren't going to get spent in ways that would have been spent if we had been in a normal year, to offset a good amount of that cost. Jeff is comfortable with the remainder of that for a short-term expense. Staff would be exposed to more students daily, but fewer at a time than the other plans. So that's kind of not really a challenge, but if we're following all the guidelines, there's really no real danger. Some students may need to change teachers. You will see that a little bit later when we get into the different ways that we're going to staff it. There's only time for a quick clean in between sessions. We're only going to have roughly 90 minutes in between sessions. So we're going to need to come up with a system to touch every touched surface and door handle and light switch, but it's not going to be the extensive overnight deep clean that we're able to do over a 7 or 8 hour shift. So if we have teachers that become quarantined, or the few teachers that we have that aren't going to be able to return from a child rearing accommodation or have an ADA qualifying disability of some kind, there's a little bit less flexibility in this plan than the other plans for them to work from home. And like I said, a challenge that specials and encore classes would be offered remotely. So students will need to be assigned to an AM or PM session. Families will be notified of their assignment. Parent choice of AM or PM will not be offered. We really think that the AM session is going to be 2 to 1, maybe more popular than the PM session, and the purpose is to cut the population in half. Now, I hesitate to say this in public, but when a family comes to a principal with a compelling reason why they can't do the session that they were assigned, of course, principals are going to do everything that they can to accommodate that. But the number of times they can do that in one direction is very small if the purpose of this is to split the population in half. So that's, I think, a real weakness to this option, is that families are going to have to be assigned. Now, we can do some things to make it easier. We're going to have Central figure their AM, PM first, because they've got all kinds of other considerations. Students that are getting special services, students that are in accelerated, students that chose certain specials. Those are going to have to be offered one or the other in a balance with each other, and with special education 70-30 rules, there's a lot of considerations that make that they have to go first. Once they do that, they can hand those last names down to the elementary principals so that we can do the second bullet and make sure that every family's on the same schedule. That's going to be a huge advantage for families, that they don't have their older, typically babysitting kid in school when the other kid is home alone, remote. So that's a real plus to the plan. Transportation will be available, but we're going to discourage it. It's just safer to come in your own family vehicle, or to walk with a family member, or if you're close to the school and old enough, walk alone. We will have bus transportation available for anybody who can't do that. But just as a practical tip, and we're not the ones that are cleaning the buses between routes, our bus company is, it just may be a better parenting decision if you can swing it to provide your own transportation. We're going to do the best job that we can to insist that the buses are safe, relatively low populations, et cetera. But I think we're going to just give that to parents as a tip. I think another one that we're going to give them is to choose the hybrid and come back to school, because this plan can handle 100% of our students. That was one of the things that was a tight for us, is that if half the students chose it or all the students chose it, it would work. And if all the students chose this hybrid plan, the class sizes would be half. So we're going to encourage parents to send their kids to school, and we're going to tell them about all the things that we've done to make it as safe as it can be. So this is tricky. We're required to have a full remote option, which we intended to do anyway. But it's challenging to do that as well as we're doing it now when all of our staff are in the classroom teaching our hybrid program. So challenging. Students will have all subject areas. Students will be served through full remote. We'll likely have a different teacher than they have right now, because of course we're going to need almost all of their teachers to come back and teach in person. We'll use the same online tools as resources, and kindergarten age students will be able to do full or half, and they can choose remote or in person. So here's two different strategies, and we're going to probably have to use both in different situations in order to get this sucker staffed. The first is a district grade level cohort. If there are three teachers in third grade at Memorial. And they're each teaching an AM section and a PM section with half of their students in each. That's essentially 6 half sections. The idea is maybe, depending on how many parents choose full remote, have one of those 6 sessions be,
That's the other option. That's the
oh,
building
I'm
grade
sorry,
level.
I'm describing the building
Yeah.
grade level cohort. My mistake. That's very important. So within a building, a grade level cohort, 3 teachers, each teaching AM and PM, we could make one of those 6 sessions the core instruction for the kids that were in these groups for their full remote. So 2 teachers would be teaching AM and PM sessions in person, and one of the teachers would be teaching 1 session in person and 1 session remote. And if lots of kids in that group of 3 third grade classes at Memorial chose full remote, then we would just make 2 of them remote. And if we've got a teacher that needs an ADA accommodation, that teacher could teach these 2 full remote sections from home. If all 3 of them can come, maybe we have 1 teacher teaching 2 in person and 2 teachers teaching 1 in person and 2 remote. The bottom line is 3 sections really makes 6 half-day sessions, so we don't have to dedicate a whole person in most grade levels to handle most of the full remote kids. The other way here is we take the teachers that can't come to school, and we assign one to each of the grade levels, K through 5, and have them teach all the students from that grade level district-wide. Now, obviously, if one grade level doesn't have very many, and one grade level has very, very many, we may need 2 to do this. But the idea is then we'd have kind of a remote learning academy where people were dedicated to doing just that. Both have their merits, both have their challenges, and we can't really commit to one or the other district-wide because of the circumstances. Some of our really old polling data had a couple grade levels asking for 40 to 50% full remote, and others that were more like 10 or 15. So we may have to use one strategy in one situation and another strategy in another. It also depends on the certifications of the teachers that need those accommodations. There are some that are receiving an accommodation for an ADA where they see all of the accommodating steps that we're taking to combat COVID, and they're comfortable coming into the school building with a half class of students with all of the things that we're doing. There's some teachers that can't. So we'll likely be using a combination of these strategies depending on we really need to find out as soon as possible which families would choose full remote and which families would choose in-person hybrid. And then we'll know better.
Yeah, I bet you.
I bet,
But they've changed.
what do you think, Doris? I think the more people are going to want to come than would have come before.
I agree with that.
I would
So the seriousness of the disease in the hearts and minds of folks is waning, that's another reason, another plus for option 1 is, like I said, we can take them all. Staffing them is the challenge, so we're going to have to use a couple different strategies district-wide in order to get it properly staffed. But the idea is we want highly qualified teachers delivering all of the instruction, whether it's in-person or remote. Cal?
I just want to add the quarantining. When we have students that do have to quarantine, the second option is a little more seamless to just kind of put students in with whatever grade level teacher in their building is teaching remote, because those grade levels will be working together closely, so that's a little easier than having that student assigned to like a district level cohort, for example. They may not be as in tune with where that child was at in their classroom when they had to quarantine. So that's another big kind of thing that was weighing on us when we were talking about this. Again, nothing is ideal, but we want to try to give the remote kids, the full remote students, the best experience that they can have too.
Really, really important consideration because the IDPH guidelines haven't changed that much. So the required quarantining of people, potentially not at all sick people, is still present. So there's going to be a good deal of that. The more of this that we can do, the more they just simply go to whatever section is remote until they're able to come back to their section that's in person. We could do that with this one, but it might be, the teacher might be from Fierk for the student who's at Memorial, and they've been trucking along remote altogether in this cohort, whereas from this one, kids could be moving in and out of those groups. And they know they're grade level team teachers because of all the coordination that they do already. Great point, Kel.
Ready to move on?
Yep. Okay, so we proposed this timeline, and the timeline that we had in front of everybody last Thursday, the goal was to get everybody back by the first day of the second trimester. And at the end of that meeting, I asked the room if they thought we could do better than that. And if we could do better than that, staffing, scheduling, assigning, would they be willing? And they all said yes. So the ad council spent all day together today trying to get to the bottom of how fast we can do this. And it was frustrating and challenging because some of us wanted to do it just as fast as we could, and other people understood that we wanted to do it as fast as we could, but had to advocate for the necessary steps that are necessary in order to do this well. And this is what we came up with. So we've got an ad council meeting tomorrow. So if I get a feel from the group tonight, we can start some of the work now. But really the important hard work comes after we find out from families who's coming back and who isn't, and after we assign AM and PM. So once Central identifies that, the work for the elementaries is a little bit easier. They need a couple days to do the AM PM thing, they need a few days to do their assigning, and then they're ready to come back. Central has a great deal of work to do after that. So we talked a little bit about, can we start 6th grade early? Can we start primary early? We were talking about this, and there was really nothing about the planning at the elementary level that would get the primary back faster if we left the intermediate out. Like they kind of do the whole school all at once. So why make the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders wait? If we're done, let's get them all in. And the same deal was going on for Central. So we talked about, could we start 6th grade sooner? And we could, but going all the way down the planning road for one grade level would make the total time necessary for all 3 grade levels more. So in other words, instead of starting 6th grade early, we would essentially be delaying 7th and 8th in order to get 6th done first. So that's why we landed on this. Do all of the elementaries by the 4th of November, and do middle school right on the first day of the second trimester. There was some talk about the first day of the second trimester isn't a great time to start kids because it's only a couple days before the Thanksgiving holiday. I was pretty rigid when the idea of waiting until after Thanksgiving came up. It would probably be a more seamless or comfortable or make like flow of the year more sense to have them wait. On the other hand, you could make the case that a few days before then might be getting our feet wet, and then we can get into it serious after Thanksgiving.
I was going to make that point. There's going to be hiccups no matter what you do. So you need time to iron out the kinks.
Yeah, so Randy and his team, it took them about 2 weeks of the longest days you can imagine, including weekends, for them to ditch the previous hybrid and schedule everybody for a full remote. And that was when they had his principal secretary, who we talked about, has recently resigned for another opportunity. She's their scheduler wizard. Understands the software. He can give her 4 ideas and let her crunch on that while he and his team are brainstorming other ideas. Her replacement just started a couple days ago, so she's not a wizard yet. Dynamite person, but just doesn't have the experience yet.
Can I interject real quick?
Sure.
I'm gonna say that I'm gonna push pretty hard to shorten this timeline up. The idea that it takes over a month for Central to reschedule kids to get them back is, it's pretty disheartening. So my question is, does the scheduling software have consultants that we could hire on a temporary basis to come out to crunch these numbers if we've got some, if the problem is a technological one and
Yeah.
we need somebody to do that, then let's get them here.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and I like the infusion of resources, but unfortunately, the scheduler is only good at like 25% of the schedule. It's just the kids that are in mainstream this, and this.
Sure.
And then you have to go back into that 20% and tweak it to make the specials work. So it's really kind of a nightmare. I don't think it's going to take them a month to do it. If you'll look, I should probably just take you through the timeline and tell you what kind of some of the rationale is. So once you guys say go, and you may say go tonight, you may say go Wednesday, you may say go next Monday, we get to the bottom of, we get to ask parents whether they want remote or hybrid. Then we can pretty quickly assign them to AM and PM while we're waiting for the responses to come back. The last time when we asked them if they wanted remote or hybrid before we went full remote, there were about 3 full days of phone calls that schools had to make in order to track down those that didn't answer. And we thought about saying, you know, if you don't reply by a certain deadline, you default to one or the other, but we couldn't figure out which one to default to. Those decisions really need to be made by families, so we needed to do the hard work of contacting every family that doesn't reply to the survey so they get into the right one for their kids. So there's a little bit of a delay there. We get the family responses on October 11th. Everything above that is as tight as we could get it. If they reply by Sunday, October 11th at midnight, we figured by the end of business Wednesday, we would know almost everybody if we made 3 straight days of phone calls all day long. Now, some part of the team can start working on Monday and Tuesday to start scheduling the ones we already know, but those will be somehow impacted and some changed by the responses of the people going forward, so you can't get too far down the road. So if we understand by Wednesday, October 14th, what everybody at Central wants as far as full remote or hybrid, by the end of business on that 3rd day, they're going to communicate the AM/PM assignments to the elementary schools. And once we do that, it gets the elementary schools moving relatively quickly. They've got some of those, remember the 2 different ways to staff it? They have to do all of those, put all those puzzles together, and they think that that'll take them about 2 weeks. So then, or actually, I think they said that it would take them about a week, but then you need a little bit of time between the time that families are notified of their schedule and the first day of school. I think we put a week to handle what didn't work. Like some of the schedules are gonna be wrong, or there's gonna be some parents that indicated this but meant that, or like I said, those few that their AM or PM isn't, like, we need them to get their schedule a bit of time before the first day that they're supposed to execute it. There's a reason why we send out schedules before the day
Well,
before
and
the first day
families
of
need to
school.
find, like, if their childcare needs are gonna change, they need a little bit of time before,
To get their houses in order.
correct.
I guess what's a little bit confusing to me, kind of echoing what Darcy's saying, is it seems to me that the hard part of all this would be Central figuring out the AM/PM assignment needs, like actually leveling out the number of kids. We're having them do that in 3 days and then spending 5 weeks, basically, figuring out when kids are going to be in each class. And I mean, if I'm understanding the Central model right, the kids are going to rotate through 4 classes? when they're in person? They're gonna attend math, ELA, science, and social studies? Is that?
PLC time, right, and a little bit of their advisory.
But they're also figuring out advanced classes, co-talk classes, keeping 70-30 ratio. They basically, the scheduling software, Randy said, figures out, like Jeff said, about 25%. Everything else has to be hand scheduled.
Yeah, but I guess my point is, how do you figure out AM, PM without knowing all that stuff? I mean, aren't kids gonna
Well, the AM
constantly
and
be
PM is
jumping?
driven
Well, yeah, so
advanced classes and the co-talks.
I think what they will probably do is block their programs, try and divide their programs among AM and PM. And they know which kids are in which program. So they try it once and then they say, how many kids is that? And then, okay, that's a little bit too much, so change. They said that they could do that in just a few days. It's the individual student schedules that, with all of their ringers, with them breaking their bed, that's the thing that they do. It usually takes them 2.5 months. They do it all summer long to get it right in the first day of school, and then there's still a few errors. I can't, it's been 15 years since since I was a middle school principal, so I'm not smart enough about the detail to convince you. I can just tell you that it was an absolute nightmare. You try and get every kid what they want and what the combination of things that they need. It's just, you pretty much have to schedule them by hand, and there's 700 or 800 of them. It's just really, really hard.
Absolutely, and I'm just gonna say from personal experience, I've lived through this twice already. You know, I've lived with an assistant principal of a middle school, so I've watched the scheduling process, I've watched those midnight hours, I've watched it, but again, 5 weeks, that's a long time to tell parents that we're waiting for people to write a schedule. It's a long time. I just think there's gotta be a way to give them more resources to make that happen faster. I mean, it is a simpler schedule because we're not worried about encores, we're not worried about specials.
Well, no, we
still have
still,
to schedule
no, we have to schedule all of those things because they're gonna happen, they're all gonna happen remotely, but they're gonna happen remotely on a completely different schedule than they're happening remotely now.
Sure.
I
get that it's hard and I don't want to downplay it.
Well, it's not-
I understand that, but
it-
I just,
It's more than that. Like, Randy's the kind of person that he says, if you'll just tell us what we need to do, we can do anything.
sure.
And he looked at me in ad council today when we did this, and the whole point of it was we were trying to snug it up. And he said what his team went through to get it done for full remote in 2 weeks was just the worst experience that he's ever had professionally, and that the thought of looking at the team and telling them to do it in 2 or 3 weeks again, down their psych, who usually helps with the special education scheduling and some of the co-teaching scheduling, and without Lucy, he just said, I have to be honest, I don't think that we can get it done well in that amount of time. So,
I mean, the reason we asked to push up sending, the family surveys out was to try to buy more time for the middle school, rather than to wait until a normal board meeting time.
yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why we're talking about, can we consider some tacit approval tonight or a special meeting in a couple days? We feel like we can't, I'm not sure I'm comfortable sending out a letter tomorrow saying, we have a hybrid plan, do you want AM or PM? Because there's nobody here today, so they don't pay as close of attention to committee meetings as they do to regular meetings. So I also didn't know this at the time, so I wasn't, if I'd known this a few days earlier, I would have just pushed this meeting out to the whole community and tried to get them to come out to this one. And then I could have asked you for action tonight. I also didn't know how everybody felt about this as the selected option. So the sooner we can get them who's going to be remote and who's going to be hybrid, this clock starts ticking. So, I mean, I think if we asked Randy to try and start the middle school a week sooner, he could find a way to get that done. I don't know at what cost. I don't mean cost. I know that we're not afraid of that. But they have to manage this after it starts. Like, they don't get to schedule this sucker and then take a couple weeks off. Like, they're going to be doing this while kids are actively full remote learning. And the day that they're done with this scheduling effort, they're going to have to lead it. So, I mean, if it's really, really important that we start sooner, I mean, they looked willing to make this happen. So, I mean, I would really encourage us to not move it up by much if we're going to move it up at all. It's just, you guys have to understand that I was the you in that meeting, and you can only, you know, kick them so hard until they stop doing what you ask them to do, if I'm being completely honest.
I hear you, but I can't, and I feel horrible that they went through the worst experience ever, but I also know that there's kids at home going through the worst experience ever, and I have to think about servicing kids before them.
They are. They are too, Julie. They understand what's at stake. They want the kids back too.
What I think a lot of parents are going to be asking is how are other school districts going to fit that to school sooner than we are? Why is it taking us so long? Other school districts are doing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, every school district's different. You know, they're every school. Yeah, I don't know what they're doing. Like, I don't know. Are they offering everything every day? Are they? I don't know. I don't know how they're doing it. I think if you benched all of us and brought their administration over here to do this the 146 way, they couldn't do it any faster than we're doing it.
I mean, maybe they're not offering advanced classes, maybe they're not doing some of the things that we're trying to add and keep in the schedule.
It's guesswork. I have no idea how they're.
Person, it's a different scheduling approach than when you're trying to schedule for a hybrid and maintain the integrity of as many programs as we can.
I believe actually they're doing, for the middle schools, I think they're doing an AB every other day model, and they're keeping their schedules, and the schedules are essentially staying identical to what they currently are.
He said that he thinks they're doing an A-B schedule and the schedules are staying the same as they are right now.
They have two different, I think, I'm almost positive, right? Isn't it 135? I thought they had two different models. They had a half day for the elementaries and they had an every other day for the middle schools.
I think they're
I mean,
in a hybrid. I think you're right now that I'm thinking.
I think they embrace two different models for the two different, which I think that creates its own set of problems, which I don't want to, but I think that's why they're able to schedule the middle schools so quickly, is because they're essentially preserving the current schedule of remote. They're just bringing half the kids in person on certain days, I think.
I mean, if you wanted to ratify Wednesday or Monday, Wendy and Kelly and I could go back to the central team and see if there's a different model that could happen faster if speed is the goal. Now, we said as many students as we could get back safely as soon as possible, but we were really interested in quality. Like, we really are trying to do the model that we think is going to be best for kids. And we think seeing every kid every day for a portion of the day, I mean, even just from a social emotional standpoint, the kids want to come to school every day.
I think some of the central teachers that were on the team felt very strongly that they see that the middle school kids are at home with their younger siblings, and they were very concerned about
Oh, the different model.
the different models, and they felt that a type for them was that they are on the same model as the elementary schools.
Yeah, for family planning, I wouldn't advocate for two different models. I'm not interested in that. And if this is the model that the entire team feels is the appropriate one, then that's fine. It's just, you know, my concern is we're going to continue to get hammered because, as Rick said, as John said, other districts are going back. And so, you know, why aren't we? And I absolutely believe in the difficulty and absolutely believe in giving the kids the best possible education. But, you know, if I'm the community, this is going to be really hard to swallow. And so we just have to know that if that's what we're going with, then Wednesday's going to be another one of those, and we'll have to take it on the chin. Because, you know, again, just looking at the timeline, lay parents are not, you know, they're going to look at that, and they're going to look at that entire month, central determining AMP and assignment needs Wednesday, October 14th, and then they don't go back until the 18th of November. Like that, I get it, but I just want everybody to know kind of what that's going to look like. But I think it's true, and I don't think that we should vote, personally, I don't think we should vote to start tonight and then just spring this on the community. Like, I think that is a disaster.
I think that even if we really liked our start dates, that the segment of the community that's going to be voice disappointment are those that need kids to come back every day, all day in order to resume their careers and those types of things. And maybe those people would be in better shape in an AB model. We talked about one of the strengths of full day every other day is that there'd be some days of the week where families would be free of their children to work a job or whatever the case may be. But when you compare all of the pluses of the half-day AM, PM, and seeing kids every day and still keeping the population in half, and the fact that those families, like, it's no worse than what they're experiencing right now with the kids home all day, every day. In fact, it's quite better, I think. The half-day that they can't go to work for 3 hours probably, but they can get some other things done kid-free that need done in order for them to run their households. But I think that even if we started it, we're able to start it very quickly, that we're probably still gonna have some disgruntled parents that nothing less than full in is gonna please them. And I think they make some good points too. I mean,
I'll say I'm in favor of just voting this tonight and skipping a special meeting. And the reason is because, and maybe it's because I was able to sit through everything, but the other night, the last week through that whole meeting, but literally every level lined up behind this. And so I think people are getting upset in the sense that they feel like we're asking them their opinion and then disregarding it. And I don't want to have another meeting where a bunch of people show up and yell at us about how stupid this model is, and then we vote in favor of it anyway, and it's just going to be that all over again. I feel like this is the way to go. I don't feel like there's an alternative in-person model to the one that's being presented, just based upon sitting there and listening to, the district office was on board, the building administrators were on board, the teachers were on board, the union was on board.
nurses.
The nurses were on board. I mean, it's like, if we go against this, we're going against pretty much every level of professionals in the district. And so I don't want to go out to the community and act like we're giving them some sort of say in what the model's gonna look like when we're not. Because at this point, it's this or remote learning as far as I'm concerned.
That's a real good point.
That's a very good point.
So, I mean,
Well,
I mean, I agree. I don't like springing things on the public either, and they have a right to be informed. I just think, I hear from parents that feel like, and I'm not casting aspersions at anyone because the process has been fluid and it's been what it's been, but people feel like they're getting asked questions and then they're not being listened to. And I don't want to continue to fan that flame. I'd rather just say, guys, this is the plan. We're coming back and this is it. And then they can yell at us if they want, but at least we didn't
Well, they're gonna come
misrepresent
Monday and do
ourselves.
that if they don't like the plan.
That's fine.
But I mean, if you guys like it tonight, and that's what you are comfortable doing, I can write the letter to the community tonight, have it translated tomorrow and out by the end of business tomorrow, that explains what we're doing. I still need the week between now and a week from tonight to write the actual document. Remember, last time I gave you a document when you were gonna ratify it? So you guys would just be giving me like the tacit go-ahead to begin, and then we would still have the community out Monday, and we would do the same type of presentation of the whole plan, if you want. Certainly, we
Yes.
would present you the whole plan.
Yeah, we should present the whole plan, but we should present it as this is the plan,
This is the
not-
plan. And then you guys would vote to ratify it.
When is our meeting then?
A week from tonight is your regular board meeting. I was gonna ask you for a special meeting. Oh, it's not on here. Yeah, it is. Board of Education approval for reopening would be special meeting. I figured what would be 48 hours after right now, and that's Wednesday night. So that's the soonest I could get you guys to do it if you wanted the public in front of you when you did it. But I bet if I told Randy we're gonna send out the make your choice letter tomorrow, and we could require it
Move that up.
by the end of the week,
We couldn't do it tomorrow.
I don't know if we can, with the translation, but we'll do our best maybe the day after it can get.
in the next day or two,
Thanks,
as fast as we
yeah.
can,
As fast as we can.
that we could have that answer by this Sunday at midnight.
And then Monday night, we're looking at real numbers.
Yeah.
Well, you're looking at probably 60% of the real numbers.
Yeah.
Further ahead than we would be.
We're almost a week, we're certainly, we're ahead. I mean, every minute is
Middle school a
ahead.
week
So
sooner.
Right.
if I told Randy that you guys did that and we're challenging him to open the Wednesday before,
Right.
I think he would just say, okay, and he would just go and do it.
I'm in favor of that.
You're in favor of that? Darcy, you too?
Yep, let's do it.
Julie?
And wherever
Yeah.
we could, and wherever we can shave time.
I'm sorry?
Wherever we can shave time,
Okay.
let's shave time.
Kelly, Wendy, what do you think about, I'm speaking for Randy, I don't like to do that.
I think he still needs the same amount of time, but I know that he's committed to getting the kids in as fast as he can. I just know that it was
And he's too stubborn to miss a deadline.
daunting. It was taking staff away from their own families for 12, 14-hour days for multiple days.
Day after day after day.
Yes, yes. So I think if we can move up this timeline, we can move up that timeline, which is, you're talking like 2 weeks then of school before it's Thanksgiving break, which is a big difference.
Yeah.
We also, what isn't on here, oh, we did put transportation. There is some transportation planning that has to occur, which is why we need those numbers back too, the
Sue and Jeff
transportation
were
routes.
with the bus company all summer long to get those routes right. And now we need 4 routes instead of 2, or 4 sets of routes instead of 2 sets of routes. So, once we get the AM, PM, and I'm gonna also ask families to say whether or not they're gonna need bus service. Because if 2/3 of them say no, we schedule less busing. So, Kelly's right, that clock will start ticking too. And so the sooner we can set that clock, the sooner they'll get that done, so. I'm totally cool with that, if that's what you guys wanna do.
So do we need to, do a motion, vote on this?
You can't do it, it's not on the agenda, so I don't think you can, can they take action if it's not on the agenda?
Well, it's noted on the agenda that we were going to discuss it,
It doesn't have to look like an action item?
so I'm not sure.
Well, why don't you do it, and we'll check whether or not it's kosher, and if it's not, I'll just ask you to react again on Monday. And if it is kosher, then we've got the green light. Cool. I think if there's a motion and a second and discussion, that I think that we can do it. The topic is certainly on the agenda.
How should this motion?
I would say,
I can do it.
okay,
I move that the Board of Education of the School District 146 approve the transition back to in-person learning as presented.
I'll second.
Further discussion? The secretary call the roll.
Barry, yes. Casper?
Yes.
Jackson?
Yes.
Lloyd?
Yes.
Menza?
Yes.
Malloy?
Yes.
that's such a relief. And just as a, like a little testimonial, Randy says that feels like he can do anything you ask him to. I feel like our team, when the board's 7-0 and we feel you behind us and we know we're pleasing you, we just approach our work with a certain positivity that it's just a pleasure. So hearing you guys all in step with this, we're going to do our very best work, and we're going to do it as quickly as we can.
Great, thank you. So at this time, I'm going to open it up for citizens to address the board. And hearing none, we're going to move on to assessments.
All right. Just taking a little time to talk about some of the MAP testing, because certainly there, are legitimate concerns that come across, like we're in this pandemic, we're in hybrid, some kids are remote. What is the value of MAP testing? So I just wanted to take a moment to share the feedback I'm getting from principals and teachers and what and how they're using it, and just run you through very quickly, from a district lens, very briefly, what that might look like. And really, at the district lens, I think we're in a year where that's not the important piece here, but I'll share an example. So I do want you to know that, we know that MAP's just normed assessment, and we know that it gives us some big pictures of overall performance, kind of related to how our kids are doing with mastery level standards, how our instructional programming is going, and how the core is functioning. And that's kind of in a nutshell how the district uses it. But more importantly, back in July when we started this planning, the principals were asking, when are we doing MAP? Because we need this data for X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to share that with you in a minute. They wanted it in fall. We all talked. We talked about maybe October after school started, getting kids, getting our model up and running, getting kids, back into the groove of school, whether it was remote learning, hybrid. At that time, things were changing pretty quickly. And since then, and since school started, I've had quite a few teacher requests as well, asking for the MAP data. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what that looks and why it might be important, or maybe we'll have a discussion and talk about why is Wendy's recommendation, no, it's not a PowerPoint. Maybe we need to rethink that. I'm very open to that. I talked to a principal just recently, and one of the things I always loved, the comment he made is what I love about this district is we're data informed, we're not data driven. And so when I think about data informed, it's that piece of data that we put with the rest of our experiences and things we're doing to make good decisions for kids and learning. And so just here's a sample of how one of our building leadership teams is using the data. They use a couple different reports, grade level reports, and they call them projected proficiency reports, which are really just a simple way of saying here's where our students are and here's where we expect them and want them to grow this year. And they put all this data down with the team, and that's how they start to identify where they want to go with their school improvement plannings. So I think the big piece of that at our building level is helping them guide their school improvement planning. And then, of course, as they go through that school improvement planning, when they're getting additional MAP data points and pulling it together with ancillary data that they have in the building, they can determine what's working and what's not. Do we need to go back to the drawing board and do more data-informed discussions? So at a building level and from a principal lens, that's where they were coming from, asking for the MAP to couple it with additional data to make good school improvement planning. Teachers have asked me, are we going to do MAP? And really how teachers are using MAP is it would help them identify certain learning needs and helps them plan for student growth. And it really kind of gives them a glimpse of, is my instruction working or not? And let me give you some examples of how they use that. Some of them use this report called Class Report and Student Profile Reports. They use learning continuum reports, and what those do is they help break down our standards and our skills very specifically and helps teachers see what do we need to do while we're planning for a unit of instruction. Do we need to fill in and support some learning before we start that? Maybe even during, we realize there's some skill breakdowns that we need to address while we're in this instructional unit of instruction. So that's how they're using those reports. They're grouping students by their need and where their skills are broken down to support them. Some schools have even taken it further in the past. We haven't obviously done it this year, where they're writing SMART goals. The teachers are writing SMART goals to really keep them focused on what is it my kids need, and then keep coming back and revisiting those SMART goals because we need to support these learning gaps or where kids need to grow. Some of the other reports I know that they used, I really like the continuum report, and basically that's just a few pages of where kids fall with their performance on one side, and then it matches up with all the skills they need as they progress the learning. So as you're looking at these students here, you can see they need these skills. And so we're going to work on those skills so we can get to the next level of learning. So that is a really helpful report that teachers have reported, helps them understand where kids are at in the continuum of learning and where do we need to go next. A couple other reports they use their student profile report, which is very specific for each student, shows their mastery level related to standards, shows their growth, and it helps us plan that intervention time that's even outside the classroom, and how do we group kids and support the learning, because we can see where this group of students kind of comes together and they need help with this specific 3 skills in geometry, or these kids are grouped because they're really struggling with some asking and answering questions related to our ELA standards. So it really helps them do the grouping for intervention as well. So that's what they've come to me. Some students in the past, we haven't done it this year, students, it's very powerful when students actually use this data to write their own goals and monitor their own learning and own it, but that's certainly something this year that we're probably not at that juncture right now because of where we're at with the pandemic and the amount of data we're collecting. So that was just some of things that the principals and the teachers shared with me, and we're asking that in January, could we go ahead and do that winter benchmark so that we can gather that data and see how it supports our programming in the classroom when we're teaching a unit of instruction, and where are those gaps that we can remediate those gaps and then go ahead and teach that unit of instruction to be successful.
Wendy?
Yeah.
When you came on board and you started getting to the bottom of what we're doing, what we're good at, what resources we have, which ones are good, which ones are working, and you saw the efforts of our data teams and our grade level teams and our principals, you said to me that we have a lot of the right structures in place, but there's a few just key elements that are missing, and they're the reason why we've got a world-class structure for improving learning in place, but our learning results tend to stay pretty similar all the time, and in a couple of cases actually decrease. Can you just say a little bit about that for the board, and also where in that the assessments fit for your ability to ascertain those things and plot a course for real student learning improvement in the district?
Absolutely. So one of the things I spent a great deal of time last fall when I came in, I reviewed the student performance and the student growth reports, reviewed subgroups with ELL subgroups to really give me a first comprehensive snapshot of how are we doing in our programming. ELA and math and language was also one of those. I took that then and went further, and I started looking at trends over 3 years. And what became evident, some of the things we were doing very well, we seemed to be doing, with ELA kind of stagnant with a little growth, but our math trend was going downwards for 3 years in our math performance. So I asked myself, we need to dig deeper. So we went into other reports as well to see our students who are struggling, what we can do and how we can make improvements at that building level. But from my lens, I went in to meet with all of the grade levels every month, all of the teachers, and we had conversations about what's working, what's not working. We looked at other data. We looked at the instructional strategies, we looked at the resources we were using, and we looked at the classroom assessments. We spent a great deal of time reviewing those assessments. And what came out of that was we felt we needed to really understand, you know, how are we delivering our instruction, and more importantly, how are kids learning? Are we missing something there? So we looked at and asked the question. We asked them, are students learning at the depth of knowledge of the standard? Yes or no? And if so, awesome. And if not, what are we not hitting the mark on? And what we came to conclude is, are we using a lot of rote? Are kids having to memorize? Or are we giving lots of understanding opportunities for kids to show their understanding and communicate their understanding and engage in activities that help them show that they're understanding the mathematics, not a worksheet? We also looked at how much of our resources are providing problem solving. So we spent a full year not just looking at the data point, but that data point took me down the lane of let's open this up and be informed. Let's talk to the teachers, what's working, what experiences, what resources, all of that, and which led to us this summer as an outcome saying, let's go and get our Common Assessment Committee together. And we spent a whole summer working with Common Assessment Committee and training them on high-quality assessments and really trying to understand how we can get those assessments crafted so our instruction and learning is hitting that high-level mark, those expectations we want kids to be learning at. And that's what we initiated this summer, and we began developing those high-level quality assessments. So that came out of that data dive that happened the previous fall, going through that time of working and meeting with teachers to understand how can we do this better for learning and for kids. We also added some additional resources because the feedback very strongly from our teachers and from the data was showing that I call it conceptually developing. You know, how are we getting kids to understand the math? Seemed like we needed some more support. So we added some resources with that, and we added some resources with the problem solving. And when I see the data from MAP, I look at that and say, well, all our kids, are we getting better mastery? Are our kids growing more now? And if it is, then let's keep having those conversations to keep making it better, but let's keep the trajectory. And if it's not, then we need to stop, and we need to back up and say, what did we miss? How can we make that learning better? So from my lens, that's what I use and how I use MAP when I dive into the data. And then we work with the principals and teachers to really try to improve the learning opportunities for kids.
When Wendy said that they were going to spend the summer working on writing quality classroom assessments, I have to be honest that my first reaction was, man, is that cart before the horse? Like, that seems to me logically that should come after quality of instruction and materials and all those other things. And then I remembered that a few years ago when we started on a professional learning communities journey and we came home from Lincolnshire, it was one of the first things Randy did with his team too. I thought, man, this is privately, I'm just kind of exposing this private conflict I had. And I thought, when Wendy did it, this was the second time where I kind of felt myself privately rolling my eyes a bit. And it was for the same thing from two different people that I really respect, so I did a little bit of my own research. And would you believe that Rick DeFore, who's considered one of the fathers of professional learning communities, and he asked in 1997 when he started, there were just 3 critical questions. What do you want kids to learn? How will you know they learn it? What will you do when they don't? He said that second question is really the key to having a good professional learning community. That if teachers know how to write high-quality, common formative assessments in their classroom that get to assessing the type of depth of knowledge that's necessary for kids to have actual deep learning on each learning objective, if teachers know how to drill that out of kids in a quality assessment, they'll know what they have to, how the instruction needs to go in order to get there. Teachers want their students to do well on their tests, and that's why if they're writing a knowledge-based memorization test, they might give the child a student study guide. They may go a couple days through the study guide. I'm talking about like 1983 instruction now. So if you write an assessment where kids need requisite depth of understanding in order to do well on the exam, then of course teachers going to take them that deep in the instruction. So it sounds cart before the horse, but it's not. It's kind of the teacher leading themselves to water. And unfortunately, we're in this COVID world, and it's
Right.
all a bit moot right now because we're not doing common formative assessments. And, you know, the reason why school improvement teams are asking for MAP data right now is to see learning loss and what essential skills from the previous school year we need to recapture before they have the requisite knowledge to do this year's skills and all of those types of things. But in a typical world that we're going to return to very shortly, and Wendy's goal of taking this really professional institution and also having it result in higher levels of student learning, I'm super excited about it. So I think for tonight, we're kind of talking about why MAP now, how much MAP, and then we've got another story to tell when we get out of the woods and start putting our regular professional school district learning hat back on.
I don't want to sidetrack, but do you mind if I jump in?
Go, go, go.
You were talking about the common assessment and developing high-quality common assessments. And I say it's always not necessarily just the end product. The most important piece of that is the process our teachers are engaging in to get there. Because I listened into multiple different committee meetings, and it was just amazing the conversations they were having that were really improving learning and instruction. And the end result was, we got a good quality assessment. But as they were talking through these standards and how and what level do we want kids learning, they were defining and improving their instruction and learning along the way to get to that end product, which was really, I thought, that's the whole purpose of going through the process of the common assessment too. It brings a lot of clarity in those conversations of where do we need this bar, and we want this bar here because of course we want our kids doing the best they can with meeting the level they need to be successful and feel good about it. So it was a really great summer experience. But then when COVID hit and all this turned around, as Jeff says, we're getting back to it. But right now, leadership teams are really working on these other details and making sure we can bring kids back right now.
So let's get the board involved
So.
with the discussion so we can get to the bottom of like how we should carry on, because there was a lot of talk about giving a fall map. The Ad Council did not agree with each other on whether or not it was the right thing to do. We landed at not considering it until we returned to in-person instruction. There's 3 map tests available, fall, winter, and spring. I always thought if we were going to do 2, fall and spring made the most amount of sense. Gina from ECRA told me that that wasn't the case. You should either do fall and winter or you should do winter and spring. She obviously she's a statistician, she wants as many data points as she can get. She understands that serving our statistician is not in the top 3 things that we necessarily make decisions based on. But Wendy, what assessments would you give, if it were just up to you, what assessments would you give this year, considering that we're in COVID?
For our grades 3 through 8, I would give a winter map benchmark. And we have a feeling that the election's going to determine whether we're doing IAR or not in the spring.
Probably.
So if we do, right now, they're saying, yes, we are doing it. We'll see where it all lands. But I would do the winter benchmark for our map, and then I would go ahead for 3 through 8, and then for the spring, I would have them just focus on the IAR, because Gina and I have had really rich discussions about how we can glean good data from those 2 together. For our younger kids, because they're not taking IAR, I'd recommend we do a map test for K2, or I'm going to say grade 1, 2 in the winter, and then do a spring map for K2. And the reason I add K at the end of there is the reality is putting the little ones on a computer in the fall and the winter, and they're just clicking away. We have found that we're not gleaning good data from that. We're getting better data from our Ames web testing and our own assessments that our kindergarten teachers have worked on. So why put them through one more test? But we do need the spring one if we're going to start looking at data like Gina and I work on together. She needs that data point in the spring, and that starts our initial benchmark data on kindergartens. And we feel like after a year of programming, we're getting some better data on kids in the spring for the kindergarten. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd like to get to the bottom of what the board feels about that, and if you differ from that vision, either because it's COVID world or you differ with it altogether, like I'd like to have that
I differ
discussion.
from it. And I hear what you're saying, and I don't understand all of it, so to be fair. I have a lot of concerns about standardized testing and just that it's focused on math and reading and not the whole child. I think that there's a place for it. I think that right now, when we have students on screens and not in real school, and to take time away from that is, maybe looking at the big lens and the big picture in your job is important. I don't do your job, so I don't want to pretend that I know it, but I also think looking at data points and not looking at seeing kids as data points takes away from who the kid really is. And I know that we say we group kids or place kids because with, the teacher recommendation and the MAP scores, but from my view, it doesn't look like that. It looks like the MAP scores are the most important piece, and it's disheartening for me to see that. I think that January sounds better to me than October. I wish we didn't do them at all. I don't think that, especially for my 8th grade son, for him to spend time out of class, now this becomes personal, but for him to spend time out of class when he's already spent so much time is not valuable time for him, for you to, this sounds snarky, and I don't mean it, but for you to get a better lens is not worth his time. Does that sound snarky? I'm sorry.
No, that sounds perfectly reasonable and mothery.
I know, and I can tell you on another personal level, that my son worked very hard in math and advocated and messaged his teacher and was now placed in accelerated math without a MAP test. And so I think so much more can come from just knowing the student, motivation or desire or connection than a data point. Maybe he would take the MAP test and he would have been placed there anyway, but I see it as more authentic.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
So I don't want the board or the community to ever get the impression that we just look at the MAP scores for any kind of placement or any kind of decision. So when we're using MAP, it's kind of like our first round of
Temperature check.
Like a large net that we're looking at. Like, okay, so I work on the opposite end of advanced a lot. So I'm working with kids that are typically kids that would fall under the below the 30th percentile mark. So those are the kids that I'm looking at and I'm saying, okay, here's our group. And from there, we have to dig deeper to see if that's even a realistic picture of that student, because often it's not. But it's a starting point that we could dig deeper and really see what the student needs. And then we do richer, where we're sitting one-to-one with a student and we're getting to know what their skill level is. And we have conversations with teachers and we have conversations with parents and we see if there's other needs. So we use that kind of as like a net or a screener per se, to kind of grab who we think we need to monitor and dig deeper on my end of it.
Right. I'm sorry I don't have experience with that because I've never had a personal conversation on any of my kids' standardized test scores. And so I know that we all come from our own perspectives, but I have to think for the general population, is it worth missing the education time in class to do that, especially at this point in time?
And you have a different view than like we have. I can just speak to when I was a principal at Memorial. There were families that they wanted to know what those scores were like the minute that they knew that their kids had tests.
They think they mean so much, and
Right.
I don't think they mean so much.
Right, but some people do think.
Well, I
they
think
mean
that,
a lot.
yeah,
So-
I do.
So we have to, again, it's like that balancing act of deciding of balancing what's too much and yet doing some things to gauge where our kids are at on a national level or on a district level so that it can guide some of our conversations.
And like I said, it does drill down deeper than it has, I think, previously when NWA came out many, many years ago. You really can drill down and see the skills that kids are either doing well on or not to help fill those skills for your instructional planning.
In a perfect world, we have all of our common assessments, and we wouldn't need this at all.
That's really
I
the
think you-
ticket, Wendy, is I really do think if we're on the professional learning communities road and teachers do become competent at writing reliable and valid common formative assessments that would replace their traditional chapter tests, so to speak,
Right.
to just use a term that we will all remember from our childhood.
Can I ask,
You
how
wanna-
much does a
oh,
round
sorry, go ahead.
of map testing cost the district?
I don't know off the top of my
I
head.
don't know
can
either.
check into it. I do know that a lot of times, when we are making informed decisions, I say informed, not data-driven, because it goes back to what Kelly said, we take into account more than just a data point. Typically, you'll look at least 2 data points to validate where you're going in both, whether it's at my level or if you're doing instructional planning for your students. You want to see multiple points to say, yep, we're on that trajectory, yep, the growth is happening where we want our kids to grow. And so that would be the other reason for the map data, because we have found, at least from my investigations, that it does support other testing we do, and then it kind of supported where our classroom assessments fell down as well.
Can I ask, like, so, let me see if I understand it. So could a class take a map test and then potentially the teacher change what she's teaching based on the results of that map test?
They do that now. They do that now, based on what are the needs in that classroom before even starting units of instruction or filling in, changing that
I would
instruction.
say that it's done more at the elementary level
Yes,
than at the
than at the
middle school level.
for
because
sure.
Randy and his teams have
Started.
developed common assessments. At the elementary level, those don't exist, so.
But they're not, you can't call them formative with a straight face unless they are affecting what the next round of teaching is. If you are giving a common assessment at the end of a unit of study and you have no intention of reteaching a different way the things that your students didn't learn, that's a summative test, that's not a formative test. The results of a formative test are meant to inform the teacher's next behavior. And if we did that, then we would really be focused on knowledge acquisition and skills development and all the things that we need to be in order for kids to learn at high levels. Like, that's the journey.
Yeah, that sounds nice. Yeah, I know, I'm jaded. I've spent a long time from ISATs to, ISAT parades, all the wasted time that my 4 kids have spent on standardized testing, and I'm left jaded, and at what cost is this? So
sure.
I'm sorry for taking up the rest of the
Julie,
board's
everybody,
time.
I will tell you that every year, the Superintendent's Association, the Principals Association, and the curriculum directors all try and convince the state to allow us to choose our own norm-referenced, you'd call them standardized test, so that we don't have to give IAR, and instead we can give MAP, because MAP actually does drill down to individual skills in the state standards, and it also gives you not just an acquisition component, but also a growth component. Student starts here, here's their anticipated growth range. Goal setting is very easy, going from here to there. The problem is the FED. The problem is that, I'm blanking what replaced NCLB now.
Every student succeeds.
Yeah, ESSA, the MAP doesn't, the state doesn't think that if they asked the Fed for permission to do that, that they would say yes. That they say that they have, and the DOE has said, no, that's not acceptable, because they said, now, if the entire state of Illinois wants to adopt MAP instead of IAR, then it would work. Not every school district in the state of Illinois gives MAP, but a good majority of them do, and they all prefer that data over IAR.
One of the things it's okay to comment there, Jeff, too, that one of the difference we hear about standardized testing, Julie, and ISAT, you're right, I think back in the time we all just dreaded it. The thing with MAP is it's adaptive. so it meets kids where they're at. It's not like this one-time test that you have to perform and attain a certain achievement level, et cetera, et cetera. It really adapts to what they know. So that's where some of that data does become valuable, because if you're performing way up here and you keep going and going and going, you could show that maybe you're ready for some higher level enrichment differentiation, because you've now shown that growth. You're maybe a grade level already above on some of these skills. So it helps the teacher say, how can I do a little differentiation to meet the student where I'm at? And likewise, it adapts. If a student starts taking the test and answering questions, and after about 3 questions, it's just way too hard and they've missed like 3 or 4 in a row, it recalibrates back down to where they're at to capture where their skills are at. And so then when they get these reports, they're able to kind of see why there's different places, you know, students are in. It's not just this one time, here's your test score and this is where you're at.
And there's no glory or shame in wherever they are. It just
Absolutely.
is what it
And
is. This
that's
is
what
what
the
the students
teachers
have.
tell me, yeah, it's
And then
important.
at the student level, I mean, any teacher or student will tell you, and maybe your kids have said otherwise, but MAP is way, way more palatable for them than IAR. Like, it's because it is adapted at their level. It's not like, IAR is definitely more stressful for kids because it's,
Right, part, sorry.
Right.
It changes.
It's called IAR.
yeah.
But I'm just,
So that is definitely a more challenging time. I mean, as a principal, that was the time where kids struggle the most, because often they're, you know, the test questions are the same regardless of what level you're at as a student, versus math is typically quicker. It's definitely less pretty painless for the kids, because it is just doing what they can do at their level.
And you're saying take it in January, and you think it's worth the time away from instruction to do it?
I do. I think for those two, you're talking, depending on the grade level, they say it takes anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes for ELA, or 30 minutes to 60 minutes for math.
So where I'm at on this is that I'm also not a fan of standardized testing. I'm much more like MAP than I like the other one, obviously, because of the leveling, because of what it gives us. I don't think we should be standardized testing kindergartners, straight up. I think that telling us that we need a data point on them in the spring is if that's what you believe, great. I do not believe that the kindergartners should be put on the screen and given a standardized test. If we can't figure out in the fall of first grade where they're at with their, and have that be their introduction, I mean, I get wanting more data points, but we're talking about the smallest of our children, and that frustrates me. I think not doing a fall map was a great idea, because I think trying to make kids take map at home would have just been a disaster. We all know that everybody has different learning circumstances, right? Some kids have great setups, some kids are struggling. I think we would have had really skewed data to try to deal with. So I think that was a genius move. If the team absolutely believes that January is the way to go, then that's great. And the last thing I'll say is that we've just spent all of this time talking about assessments for 2 subjects. And that is incredibly frustrating to me. We have kids that love science. Well, guess what? Science and social studies are just kind of lumped together in this kind of core, but not so important core. And you can say, oh no, we believe everything, but literally we've just spent all this time talking about 2 subjects. And that we're not meeting the needs of all kids if all of the focus, if a year of your work is making assessments in 2 subjects.
Well, and I think we're starting in one, we'll transition to the next, and this training transfers to social studies and science too. And
Sure, I
absolutely,
get that.
We want those common assessments in all those areas.
Sure, I totally understand that, but I'm just saying, like, the focus, whether we like it or not, or whether we like to admit it publicly or not, the focus is on reading and math. And that really bugs me.
I think we fall prey to what the focus is for high schools, what the focus is for high school placement, for college placement, so it just kind of trickles down. And I think
see that, I agree with that, but I just talk about math and ELA when we're talking about assessments. Like, if you could assess, I mean, that was kind of our effort in Literacy Studios, is the idea of assessing ELA in a manner similar to the way we assess music and art, with actual practical demonstration of knowledge in real time where the feedback is continuous. I mean, I think the reason why music teachers just tend to be so successful at the growth of their students is because all of the assessment is practical, all of it is formative, because it, by the moment, causes the teacher to do something different. And trying to mimic that in an authentic way in what we call core subjects is a challenge for the ages, challenge for the scholars for the ages. Like, if you could get kids mathing and math the way you get them playing in music, all of our problems are solved, in my opinion. That's from a very biased former music teacher perspective, but
No, but you're right.
I think there's some real magic in how formative the feedback is between teacher and student in the arts. And we do that very well, and I think that's part of the reason why we don't need any outside standardized data points in order to tell us how we're doing, because you just come to the concert and you know. I'm simplifying, of course, but you understand what I mean. When do you feel like you got what you need to carry on?
Kelly, you'll be able to bring that information in for special ed too. Okay.
Great.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, let's move on to special ed update.
Where's my stuff? Oh, just in general, how it's going?
Yeah.
Oh.
Just,
What is my special ed?
Kelly, this is, take us through who came back, in what order and why, and what's going to happen next.
Oh, got it. Okay. So you know that we had phased in students throughout the last month. We started with the students that had the most significant needs. We brought them back on campus. Then we also, with our preschool, our early learners came back, those that have special education needs. From there, we brought back another layer of students that had more instructional level needs. I will say our buildings have done a remarkable job. I have gone into every building and I have seen kids working with teachers, and I strongly believe that our ability to bring these kids back in and have the staff see the richness has led to like a mindset shift for some of our staff, where they're like saying, please bring these kids back, we miss them, we want them here. So I have taken as much time as I can to like tell them, this is awesome, this is, thank you, you're making a tremendous impact, it's been very successful. We have a variety of different models going for kids based on the needs of their family. We have some kids that are coming an hour a day every day. We have some kids that, because they need check-ins and they need some consistency to get their day started, and then they can go home and do it their class. We have some kids that are there half day every day. We have some kids that we started for maybe an hour, and then we built up their math stamina so they can leave their masks on and be in school. So I do feel that it's been tremendously successful. We also started with bringing what we call our newcomers back, or our students that are considered second language students that are new to the country. So they are coming back for additional in-person instruction as well. That's gone extremely well. But I have been so happy with the students and the staff and the feedback from the families. We have still had families that have declined in-person services. There are definitely families that feel like they don't feel it's safe for their kids to be at school. And I told the teachers, please respect that, do not push them. Even some of our kids that have the most significant needs, I think that when we offer them, for example, to come a full day, we're still gonna have some families that say, no, we really only want them to be a half a day. And I said, we're not gonna push them, because that's okay, that's their comfort level, and they know if their child can manage wearing a mask for that long. Or we have a couple students that have mask exemptions, and they know whether or not their child can manage keeping distance from people for that long. So there's a lot of different parameters and a lot of different factors that we're weighing in, but our staff has done a remarkable job of just staying connected, having individual conversations with families, and really meeting them where they're at, and being extremely flexible. So I am so proud of them for that. So that's my special ed update. Have you heard positive feedback from the community regarding the kids that we've brought back? Okay.
Thanks, Kelly. And then next up is this food service intergovernmental agreement. Is that what Jeff is?
Yeah, Jeff will do that.
Wait for him to come back. You're up.
You're fast, Cal.
It's gone great.
So food service. Next Monday, Jay Money's going to ask you to ratify an addendum to the food service intergovernmental agreement with 135. Because of the way we're doing food service during COVID doesn't make sense in our current intergovernmental agreement for the way we pay for the food that we get from 135. So I'm just going to read you Jay Money's testimony here so you know. Since we have to do it right away, typically this is the type of thing I'd like to give you an info item 1 month and then ask you to act the following month, so this is why we're doing it.
Is this the same as the email he sent us?
Yes.
Okay. just
Are there any,
making sure.
did everybody receive the email he sent you about it?
Yeah.
Are there any questions about the new agreement? That's all I have.
No sense in reading, I mean.
I won't
we all
waste your
got
time.
it, So,
I was just gonna read you the email again, I didn't realize I sent it to you.
yeah.
Brilliant.
Do we have food service numbers?
I'm sorry?
Food service numbers. We haven't been
yeah.
getting those lately. I just
I'll get 'em.
curious to see kind of where we are on
Yep.
what, how people are.
They just kinda stopped coming.
Yeah.
I'll
Just
get,
like to-
yep,
I try to publicize this as much as I can to let people know that it's there if they need it, so.
got it.
Okay, is there any new business that anybody would like to discuss?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the survey and that, wanted to know what, if there's any changes that have been implemented from the results?
We just closed it on Saturday night.
Okay.
So we're finishing up and finalizing the data. We were in meetings unfortunately all day today with this. So finalizing the data, and then certainly the things we looked at that to me, Glean, was looking at our screen time, how that looks with breaks, and do we need to reduce some of that time, and how can we do that effectively and still maintain good quality learning for kids. That was one that I felt was a strong one. And so we'll look at that. And that will go into part of our planning into remote learning with this next hybrid model as well. So we talked about that because some people said, oh, it'll look exactly like it has. And I'm like, no, let's back up and like take this data and this information we got and let's make some modifications to the remote learning part based on that feedback. So we're going to be talking actually tomorrow about that a little bit.
One of the interesting things is I talked to Vern before the meeting, one of my high school son, my only high school son, told me he was online for 37 hours last week. And I said, well, 37 hours, how do you know that? And he said, well, I looked at the screen time on my iPad. So my 8th grader, I went to look at his iPad to see what his screen time was, and it's restricted. And so Vern said he was going to find out why that. I didn't want to answer for you, but that it came as a package. But I am curious to see how many hours he was on his iPad for.
I'm sorry, Julie, how many hours?
My high schooler was on for 37 hours. He
Yep.
goes to school less time than my 8th grader. But my 8th grade, it's restricted on their iPad, so I couldn't see.
Oh,
The screen time.
yep. Can we enable that?
Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
Okay.
That'd be good to know.
One of the complaints that I've heard about the survey is that the communication about the survey, when it went out, didn't explain a lot about it. That I think that needs to be more detailed. It seemed to cause some confusion.
Future surveys will come with a cover letter that doesn't just explain what it is, but what the motivation is and what action will come as a result of the results.
Yeah, all that information I think would have been helpful and
Yeah, I'll be honest,
Rick, I can't hear you, I'm so
I'm sorry. The feedback that I got from the survey, and frankly, my own impression as a parent of the survey, it wasn't the best survey, really. And I know it was crafted with specific data points I'm sure that you were looking for in mind. What struck me, though, I couldn't quite put my finger on, like, why. And actually, it was the conversations last week, and then actually even here today. You know, getting back to being a professional learning community. There really wasn't anything in the survey about learning. You know what I'm saying? Like, you always talk about teaching versus learning. That survey was about teaching, not about students learning. I don't think people, you know what I mean? It was a lot of like, is the amount of screen time appropriate? You know, whereas I think what people are worried about right now, and maybe we're trying to get down, we're trying to fine tune our model for them, and I get that, but I think what people are worried about right now is my kid learning anything? And they want to be able to express that, and I don't think there was an outlet for that in that survey. Now, we don't, you know, I'm not saying we necessarily need to provide an outlet for everyone to emote every survey, but I think to the extent there was frustrations vented in that survey towards you, and I was thinking about like why, what ultimately was the root of that, I think that was really it, is that it was, I mean, there was a few questions that were, you know, how do we do stuff even better, you know, and that kind of tone maybe isn't the best either these days, you know what I mean? But then on top of that, it's sort of, I don't know, there wasn't really much opportunity, I don't think, for people to address learning, if that makes sense. And I tried looking up the survey just now, but it's expired, the Google Doc link is expired and stuff, so I wasn't able to pull it up to kind of refresh my memory, but that's sort of my recollection of it. So I just thought I'd express that.
Appreciate that feedback.
Can I ask, when you had the Institute Day on September 25th, what were the topics of that Institute Day?
For September 25th.
Yeah, the one we just had.
We had, there was a big emphasis on the trauma-informed, that kids are working on with SEL and teachers, and also just even supporting not only the trauma-informed, both from a teacher perspective and just being a human being through this. So a good deal of that, and then we did spend a lot of time planning to support teachers if we were gonna go forward with any of our assessment administration on how you can do that to the best of your ability and keep those results valid and what that looks like and the tech aspect of that. So a lot of, we put some time into having teachers understand how do you administer an assessment. And it was only maybe 40 minutes of that. The big majority was about our trauma-informed.
I'm sorry, about what, Wendy? Trauma-informed?
The big bulk of it was our trauma-informed.
And then the buildings had time to do things themselves.
I was concerned because I think students were told that they were going to give the MAP test, and then they were told it was suspended, and so my concern was that the Institute Day was spent on teaching teachers how to do it remotely, and that time was wasted. And
I don't think it's wasted because we did do some Ainsworth dabbling, which is another piece of data we got gleaned. Many of our teachers last year did a little bit with our Ainsworth just to get a pulse on some just foundational skills. So we spent minimal time on that, maximum time on the trauma-informed. And we also had a choice board for teachers because as they're still using these resources, wanting to know how to use them better, there was just a wealth of menu of options for them to go in and get some additional training on some of our resources and time to build these planning with their teams, which I think was a really important thing to have.
That time was more customized based on what the individual teacher knew that they needed a bit of. Trauma-informed was really the
Everyone got that.
the show of the day.
Anything else?
Just one last thing, and this is just a request for when we do the presentation next week for the new schedule. Can we be sure to include a sample day for an elementary student and a middle school student so people can understand how their kids will be spending their day?
Yep. We started developing that today as the clock was striking 12.
Okay, cool.
We'll have that for Monday.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And I need a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Secretary, call the roll.
Barry, yes. Casper? Jackson? Lloyd?
Yes.
Menza?
Yes.
Malloy?
Yes. We are adjourned.